Picture this, it's ke 1759. A British admiral stands on his ship's deck, telescope pressed to his eye, watching the French fleet desperately fleeing into Portuguese waters. The next few hours, they'll reshape the entire world. The man with the telescope is Edward Boscawen, and his story is one you've probably never heard. Yet he deserves to stand alongside Nelson himself. So why don't we know about him? That's what we're here to uncover. Edward Boscawen, old Dreadnought, they called him. The admiral who never lost a major battle. The man who captured the supposedly impregnable fortress of Louisbourg. The commander who obliterated the French Mediterranean fleet in one of the most daring naval actions the 18th century ever witnessed. And he hated it all whilst genuinely cheering for the sailors under his command. Now, that's rare for the 1700s. Born on the 19th of August, 1711, at Tregotenan in Cornwall, Edward entered a world of privilege, yes, but also one of duty. The Boscawens weren't just wealthy, they were a family with generations of service to the crown. His father sat in parliament and the latter became Viscount Falmouth. Around the dinner table, young Edward heard endless tale of politics, naval affairs, and the Britain's growing power across the globe. Cornwall back then was utterly bound to the sea. From the windows of the family estate, young Edward would have watched ships gliding past merchant vessels, naval frigates, the works. The county-bred sailors like farmers bred cattle. For a boy born into a family with status but not enormous wealth, the Royal Navy offered something irresistible: glory, fortune, and the chance to serve king and the country. At just 15 years old, in 1726, Edward joined the Royal Navy as a volunteer. Sounds shockingly young, doesn't it? But in those days, boys went to sea at 12 or 13 routinely. What set Boscawen apart was his social standing. As the son of a viscount, he entered as a volunteer per order, a privileged position that put him on the fast track to becoming an officer. He wasn't sure to scrub decks. He was sure to learn command. His first ship was HMS Superb, and the lad took the naval life like a duck to water. The 18th century Royal Navy was brutal. Ships were cramped, disease-ridden wooden boxes where hundreds of men lived in conditions we'd find utterly unbearable today. The food? Dreadful. Salt pork and the ship's biscuits crawling with weevils. Water went rancid in the barrels. Discipline was enforced with the whip. Yet the Navy also offered adventure, the possibility of prize money from captured ships, and for those with talent and the right connections, rapid promotion. Boscawen proved himself a quick study. He learned navigation, gunnery, how to handle ships in every kind of weather. He studied how to read the sea and the sky, predict storms, coax maximum speed from canvas and the timber. More crucially, he learned how to lead men, how to earn their respect through competence and the care, not just fear. By 1727, aged just 16, he was promoted to lieutenant. Remarkably fast, even for someone with his family connections. Clearly, young Boscawen had impressed people who mattered. Through the 1730s, he served on various ships during what was technically peacetime, though Britain and Spain were constantly sparring over trade and the territory in the Caribbean and the Mediterranean. These years gave him priceless experience under different commanders, learning what worked and what absolutely didn't. In 1732, Boscawen saw his first real action against the Barbary pirates of North Africa. These corsairs had terrorized Mediterranean shipping for centuries. Boscawen distinguished himself, showing the cool courage under fire that would become his trademark. His name began circulating in naval circles. Then came 1739 and the War of Jenkins. That's its actual name. The story goes that a British merchant captain named Robert Jenkins claimed Spanish Coast Guards had sliced off his ear, which he preserved in a battle and allegedly displayed to Parliament. Whether true or propaganda, it gave Britain the excuse it wanted to challenge Spanish control of lucrative American trade routes. Boscawen, now a seasoned officer in his late 20s, participated in several Caribbean operations. The Caribbean in the 1740s was absolutely brutal. Yellow fever killed more men than Spanish cannons ever did. Ships rotted rapidly in the tropical heat. Yet fortunes could be made from captured Spanish treasure ships, and the strategic ports could shift the entire balance of imperial power. In 1742, aged 31, Edward Boscawen was promoted to post captain and given his own ship. This was the pivotal moment in any naval officer's career. From this point forward, promotion to Admiral was simply a matter of seniority. Unless you died, got cashiered for incompetence, or retired, you'd eventually become an admiral just by outliving those above you. His first command was HMS Dreadnought, a 70-gun straight ship of the line. This is where he got his famous nickname, Old Dreadnought. The ship was a powerful workhorse of the Royal Navy, with 70 cannons across 2 gun decks that could pound enemy vessels into splinters. She required nearly 600 men to sail and fight effectively. Managing such a ship demanded exceptional leadership skills. Boscawen proved more than equal to it. He had a gift for inspiring loyalty. Unlike man officers who ruled purely through fear, Boscawen combined firm discipline with genuine concern for his sailors' welfare. He ensured they were fed as well as circumstances allowed, never cheated them of their pay or prize money, and he made sure sick or injured men received the best available medical care. In return, his crews served him with remarkable devotion. There's a famous story from his time commanding Dreadnought. During a storm in the Bay of Biscay, one of the most treacherous stretches of water any sailor could encounter, a young midshipman was washed overboard. Without hesitation, Boscawen ordered the ship to heave to, a dangerous maneuver in such weather, and he personally supervised the rescue. When the boy was hauled by aboard, more dead than alive, Boscawen wrapped him in his own coat and he had him taken to his cabin to recover. The entire crew witnessed this. Word spread throughout the fleet. Here was a captain who actually cared whether his men lived or died. This wasn't weakness, it was the kind of leadership that made men willing to follow you into hell itself. The War of the Austrian Succession dragged on through the 1740s. Boscawen saw action across the Mediterranean, Atlantic, and the Channel. He fought in several fleet actions, learning the complex choreography of naval warfare where dozens of ships maneuvered in formation, seeking advantage, trying to break enemy lines with devastating broadsides. In 1747, Boscawen participated in the First Battle of Cape Finisterre under Admiral George Anson. The British fleet intercepted a French convoy bound for North America and captured several French warships loaded with supplies. Boscawen's ship was in the thick of it, and his handling of Dreadnought drew praise from Anson himself, one of the Navy's most respected commanders. But it was 1748 that truly made Boscawen's mark. He was given command of a squadron and sent to the East Indies, where British and French interests were clashing over control of trade and territory in India. The Mughal Empire was fragmenting, leaving a power vacuum that European trading companies rushed to fill. Boscawen arrived with orders to challenge French naval power and support British allies on land. What followed showcased his abilities as both naval commander and strategic thinker. He blockaded French-held ports, strangling their supply lines. He landed marines to reinforce British positions ashore. He fought several naval actions, winning tactical victories that gave Britain naval superiority in the region. The culmination was the Siege of Pondicherry, the French East India Company's principal settlement. Boscawen coordinated naval and land forces in an attempt to capture this heavily fortified port. The siege lasted months and ultimately failed, not because of Boscawen's shortcomings, but because the monsoon season arrived. His ships were battered by storms, his men dying of tropical diseases, and he was forced to withdraw. Yet even in failure, Boscawen demonstrated his ability to conduct complex combined operations thousands of miles from home. He returned to England in 1750 with his reputation enhanced. The Admiralty recognized that he'd achieved as much as was possible under extremely difficult circumstances. More importantly, they recognized in him a fighting admiral, someone who'd take initiative, who wasn't afraid of risk, who could be trusted with independent command. In 1751, Boscawen married Frances Glanville, known as Fanny. Their letters reveal a man quite different from the stern-fighting admiral. To Fanny, Edward was affectionate, playful, deeply devoted. He called her his dearest love, wrote constantly when at sea, shared his thoughts and worries. She managed the growing family and provided the emotional anchor they needed during dangerous deployments. It's a reminder that even had-beaten naval commanders were human beings with vulnerabilities. The couple had 5 children, and Boscawen proved as devoted a father as circumstances allowed. His letters to Fanny overflow with questions about the children's health and progress. Here was no more distant patriarch but a loving father separated from his family by duty. The early 1750s brought an easy peace, but everyone knew another war with France was coming. The two nations were rivals for global dominance, competing everywhere: North America, the Caribbean, India, Africa. Their interests clashed at every turn. Boscawen was promoted to Rear Admiral in 1751. When tensions with France heated up in 1755, he was given command of a squadron to patrol the Channel approaches and intercept French reinforcements being sent to Canada. In June 1755, Boscawen encountered a French squadron off Newfoundland. A chase ensued, and he managed to capture 2 French ships of the line along with several hundred troops they were transporting. This action, taken before war was officially declared, caused outrage in France and delight in Britain. The captured French officers protested they weren't at war. Boscawen supposedly replied he was obeying his orders and that gentlemen could settle diplomatic niceties later. It was an act of barely disguised piracy that set the tone for the coming conflict. The 7 Years' War broke out officially in 1756. This was truly a world war, fought across multiple continents. Naval power would be crucial because it determined who could reinforce and supply their colonies, who could strike at enemy commerce, who controlled the sea lanes. The early years went badly for Britain. In North America, the French won victories. In the Mediterranean, Minorca fell after Admiral Byng was defeated and withdrew. The British public was outraged. Byng was court-martialed and executed, prompting Voltaire's famous observation that the British shoot an admiral from time to time to encourage the others. The disaster led to a change of government. William Pitt the Elder came to power with a new strategy: concentrate on the colonial and the naval war, use naval superiority to strike at French colonies worldwide, subsidies of Prussia to keep France busy in Europe. It was a strategy that required aggressive, capable naval commanders willing to take risks. Edward Boscawen was exactly what Pitt needed. In 1758, Boscawen was given one of the war's most important commands: leadership of naval forces supporting an expedition to capture Louisbourg, the mighty French fortress guarding the entrance to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Louisbourg was the key to Canada. As long as France held it, they could reinforce Quebec and Montreal. If Britain could take it, the entire French position in Canada would become untenable. But Louisbourg was considered nearly impregnable as state-of-the-art fortress, heavily garrisoned, defended by French warships. The expedition was massive. Nearly 14,000 troops under General Geoffrey Amherst were transported aboard Boscawen's fleet of over 150 ships. It was one of the largest amphibious operations ever attempted. The fleet departed Halifax in late May 1758. By early June, they were approaching Cape Breton Island. Now came the first major challenge: landing the army on a hostile shore in the face of determined French resistance. The French had fortified the beaches, positioning troops and the artillery to massacre any landing force. The weather was terrible: fog and the heavy surf making landing extremely dangerous. Day after day, Boscawen and the Amherst studied the coastline, looking for an opportunity. On the 8th of June, the weather cleared slightly. They decided to attempt a landing at 3 beaches simultaneously to defy French defenses. Boscawen personally supervised the naval side, positioning warships to provide covering fire, organizing boats to carry troops ashore. It was incredibly risky. Boats full of soldiers had to row through heavy surf whilst French muskets and cannons fired at them. Men capsized, men drowned, weighed down by equipment. But British troops, including a young brigadier named James Wolfe, stormed ashore with such ferocity that the French abandoned their positions. It was a stunning achievement. Man had thought landing impossible. Now began the siege proper. The British army dug trenches whilst Boscawen's ships blockaded the harbor. Boscawen didn't just sit offshore. He was constantly active, using smaller vessels to probe defenses, landing naval guns to support artillery bombardment. At one point, seeing French ships in the harbor were still a threat, he organized a daring nighttime boat attack. British sailors rowed silently into the harbor under cover of darkness and set several French warships ablaze. It was exactly the kind of aggressive action that characterized his command style. The siege dragged on for weeks. British artillery pounded the fortress day and night. French defenses slowly crumbled, but the British had one crucial advantage. Boscawen's fleet ensured they could be supplied whilst the French could not. On the 26th of July, 1758, after 48 days, the French governor surrendered. It was a triumph that resounded throughout the British Empire. The supposedly impregnable fortress had fallen. The gateway to Canada was open. Church bells rang across Britain. Pitt's strategy was vindicated, but Boscawen wasn't finished. After securing the fortress, he took part of his fleet to complete another task. French settlements along the Gulf of St. Lawrence needed eliminating to prevent them serving as bases for privateers. Boscawen dispatched squadrons to round up the Acadian population and to destroy their settlements. It was harsh policy, part of the broader British campaign to remove French-speaking Catholic Acadians from the maritime region, a campaign modern historians recognize as ethnic cleansing. Thousands were deported, their homes burnt, communities destroyed. This dark chapter reminds us that historical heroes were products of their time with values quite different from our own. Military glory often came at terrible human cost, paid by people who had little say in the wars engulfing them. With Louisbourg secured, Boscawen returned to England in late 1758 to a hero's welcome. King George II received him personally. Parliament voted him thanks. He was celebrated in newspapers and the ballads, but Boscawen wasn't one to rest. He knew the war was far from over. The year 1759 would become known as the year of victories for Britain, a miraculous year when British forces seemed to win everywhere. Quebec fell. British forces won important European battles. And at sea, British admirals won crucial victories securing naval supremacy. Boscawen would play a major role. In early 1759, he was appointed commander of the Mediterranean fleet. His orders were simple but daunting: find the French fleet and destroy it. The French Mediterranean fleet was based at Toulon, consisting of a dozen ships of the line, a formidable force commanded by Admiral de la Clue. French strategy was to avoid battle until they could link up with other squadrons, creating a force strong enough to challenge British control of the Channel and potentially cover an invasion of Britain. Boscawen's job was preventing this concentration of French naval power. He established a blockade of Toulon, keeping the French bottled up. Blockade duty was grueling, unglamorous work. Ships had to remain at sea for months, patrolling in all weathers. Crews grew sick. Ships needed repairs. But the blockade was essential. In August 1759, Admiral de la Clue decided to make a break for it. He waited for a dark night with favorable winds and he slipped out of Toulon, hoping to evade the blockade and make for the Atlantic. Boscawen learned of the escape almost immediately. His frigate spotted the French fleet and he raced to inform him. He immediately ordered his fleet to give chase. It began one of the great naval pursuits of the Age of Sail, a stern chase lasting several days as the British hunted the French across the Mediterranean. The French had a head start, but Boscawen's ships were well maintained, his crews expertly trained. Slowly, inexorably, the British closed the gap. On the 17th of August, as both fleets approached Cape St. Vincent off the Portuguese coast, Boscawen's leading ships came within sight of the French rear. It was early evening, not ideal for a fleet action, but Boscawen didn't hesitate. He signaled general chase, meaning every British ship was to engage the enemy as quickly as possible without waiting to form a formal line-up battle. It was aggressive, risky, but Boscawen trusted his captains and he knew his crews were better trained than the French. What followed was one of the most dramatic naval actions of the century, the Battle of Lagos. It was fought partly at sea, partly in Portuguese territorial waters, a violation of Portuguese neutrality that caused diplomatic protests, but which Boscawen ignored in the heat of battle. The French fleet was in disarray, some ships trying to fight, others fleeing, still others running for Portuguese ports. Boscawen's flagship, HMS Namur, a 90-gun second-rate ship of the line, led the charge. One great misconception about naval warfare in the Age of Sail was that it was slow and stately. In reality, when ships closed the battle range, events unfolded with terrifying speed. Cannons roared, shots smashed through hulls, splinters flew like deadly shrapnel, sails ripped, masts toppled, men screamed. Smoke was so thick you could barely see yards ahead. Boscawen personally directed the action from his quarterdeck, an incredibly dangerous position. Quarterdecks were exposed platforms where officers directed ship movements. They were primary targets for enemy fire. Admiral after admiral was killed or wounded, sir. Boscawen seemed to bear a charmed life, standing calmly amid chaos, issuing orders, adjusting tactics. British ships closed with the French one by one, engaging in brutal close-range duels. Several French ships struck their colors and surrendered. Others tried fleeing into Portuguese waters, hoping the British wouldn't follow. They were wrong. Boscawen wasn't going to let the French escape on a technicality. He ordered his ships to pursue right into Lagos Bay, where several French ships had anchored under Portuguese shore batteries. The British sailed right in, ignoring Portuguese protests and the warning shots. They engaged the French at point-blank range, pounding them into submission or forcing them to beat themselves. 2 French ships of the line were captured. 3 more were burned by their own crews to prevent capture. It was a devastating victory. The French Mediterranean fleet had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. The battle had far-reaching strategic consequences. With the Toulon fleet destroyed, France lost control of the Mediterranean. Their allies had to reconsider. French plans to concentrate naval forces and threaten Britain were in ruins. Combined with Admiral Hawke's victory at Quiberon-Bec 4 months later, British naval supremacy was established so decisively that France effectively abandoned hope of challenging Britain at sea for the rest of the war. But victory had a price. The battle was fierce, and the British casualties, whilst lighter than French, were still substantial. Boscawen organized care for the wounded, burial of the dead, repairs to damaged ships, and he dealt with diplomatic fallout. He returned to England once again as a conquering hero. The Battle of Lagos added to his formidable reputation. He was made a member of the Privy Council, recognizing him as not just a fighting admiral but a strategic thinker whose advice was valued at the highest levels. But Boscawen's health was beginning to fail. Decades of service at sea in all climates, the stress of command, tropical diseases all had taken their toll. In 1760, aged just 49, Edward Boscawen fell ill with what was probably typhus or typhoid fever. Despite the best medical care available, his condition worsened. He died on the 10th of January, 1761, at his home in Surrey, surrounded by his wife and the children. His death was mourned throughout Britain. Newspapers published lengthy tributes. Naval officers spoke of their admiration and the loss. Common sailors remembered old Dreadnought with genuine affection, a rarity when most officers were viewed with fear or resentment. Boscawen was buried at St. Michael Pencafield Church in Cornwall, not far from where he was born. His monument describes him as equally distinguished for intrepid courage, steady conduct, and the humanity with reconciled enemies. That last phrase is particularly telling. In an age of brutal warfare, Boscawen earned a reputation for treating prisoners with respect, showing mercy when possible. He fought hard, but he wasn't cruel. His legacy extended beyond his victories. Officers who served under him became important commanders themselves, spreading his methods throughout the Navy. His emphasis on caring for sailors, maintaining high standards of seamanship and gunnery, aggressive tactics that seized initiative. When you read about Nelson's band of brothers, that close-knit group of talented captains, you're seeing the fruition of a tradition Boscawen helped establish. The capture of Louisbourg opened the way for British conquest of Canada, one of the most important strategic developments of the 18th century. Without Boscawen's success in 1758, Quebec's fall in 1759 might not have been possible. The Battle of Lagos demonstrated that British naval superiority wasn't just about having more ships. It was about better training, better leadership, more aggressive tactics, willingness to take risks. Boscawen embodied all these qualities. In the broadest sweep of British history, Boscawen's career coincided with and contributed to Britain's emergence as the world's dominant naval and imperial power. The 7 Years' War, sometimes called the First True World War, was fought on 4 continents and determined which European powers would control vast territory. Britain's victory, secured largely through naval supremacy, set the stage for the century of British dominance that followed. Edward Boscawen didn't live to see the peace treaty or witness the full fruits of his victories, but he'd played a crucial role in creating this new reality. So what can we learn from Admiral Edward Boscawen's story today? Perhaps the most important lesson is about effective leadership. Boscawen succeeded because he balanced firmness with compassion, high standards with care for those under his command. He demanded excellence but provided the support and the training to achieve it. He was willing to take risks but prepared carefully. These are the timeless leadership principles applicable far beyond naval warfare. His story also reminds us of the human cost of imperial expansion. The British Empire Boscawen helped build broad development to some regions but also conquest, exploitation, and the suffering Timan peoples. We can admire his professional competence whilst acknowledging the complicated moral legacy of the cause he served. Finally, his life illustrates how individuals can shape history. The capture of Louisbourg wasn't inevitable. The French fleet might have escaped at Lagos if Boscawen had been more cautious. History is contingent, shaped by decisions individuals make at crucial moments. Boscawen made the right decisions at several such moments, and the consequences rippled outward, affecting millions and altering the balance of global power. Edward Boscawen died more than 260 years ago, but his impact on British and the world history remains. He was one of the key architects of British naval supremacy. He helped win the war that made Britain a global imperial power. He set standards of leadership and the professionalism that influenced the Royal Navy for generations. And he did all this whilst remaining, by all accounts, a fundamentally decent man, a loving husband and the father who inspired genuine affection rather than just fear or respect. When we think about British history, we naturally think of kings and the prime ministers, of Shakespeare and Newton. We should also remember the admirals who fought the battles, won the victories, created the conditions that allowed Britain to play such an outsized role in world affairs. Edward Boscawen, old Dreadnought, deserves to be remembered among the greatest of them. His ships are long gone, rotted away or broken up for timber centuries ago. But the consequences of what those ships and the men who sailed them accomplished continue to shape our world. So remember the name, Admiral Edward Boscawen. Remember the boy from Cornwall who won to sea at 15 and rose to become one of Britain's greatest fighting admirals. Remember the man who combined courage with compassion, tactical brilliance with strategic vision, professional excellence with personal decency. Remember the victories he won and the empire he helped build. And remember, too, the human costs and the moral complexities of that achievement. History is rarely simple, and our heroes are always flawed humans living in their particular times. But some individuals still deserve to be remembered and honored for what they accomplished and how they conducted themselves. Edward Boscawen is one of them. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the life of a forgotten hero who helped shape the world we live in, do consider giving this a like and sticking around for more stories from history that deserve to be told. There are countless figures like Boscawen, remarkable people whose names have faded but whose impact remains. Until next time, remember, history isn't just dates and the battles. It's the stories of remarkable individuals whose decisions and the actions shape everything that follows.